Genghis Khan, and a village that fell asleep with an army inside. Chapter 1. When the grass learned to be quiet. Night did not fall all at once. It arrived slowly, like a blanket being pulled with care over the shoulders of the world. The sky softened from blue into bruised purple, then into a deep, patient dark. Stars appeared one by one, hesitant at first, as if checking whether it was safe to shine. Genghis Khan rode at the front of his army, but not ahead of it. Tonight, nothing was ahead of anything. The horses moved gently, their hooves muffled by tall grass that seemed eager to hush their sound. Even the wind behaved itself, slipping between banners instead of tearing at them. The great conqueror felt an unfamiliar heaviness behind his eyes. Not fear, not doubt, but the pleasant weight of exhaustion. It was the kind that comes before sleep, when thoughts slow down and even memories stop arguing with one another. That was when the village appeared. It did not emerge suddenly. It simply was, as though it had always been there, and only now remembered to be seen. A cluster of houses rested in a shallow valley, close together, leaning inward like old friends sharing a lullaby. Warm light glowed behind small windows, steady and calm, the color of candle wax and honey. No walls surrounded the village. No guards stood watch. No dogs barked. The army slowed without being commanded. The houses were wrong in small, gentle ways. Their roofs curved too much, like backs bent with age. Their walls were uneven, breathing in and out so subtly that one could almost mistake it for imagination. Chimneys exhaled thin ribbons of smoke that drifted downward instead of up, curling lazily around door frames before dissolving into the night. Genghis Khan raised his hand, and the army halted. The silence that followed was deep and padded, as if the world had placed cotton in its ears. He listened. From the village came a sound, not music, not speech, but something softer. A rhythm. The slow, steady cadence of something enormous resting. He felt no threat, no warning. Only a strange tenderness, like the moment just before a child falls asleep in a stranger's arms. "Strange place," someone whispered behind him. Genghis Khan did not answer. His gaze rested on the houses, and for a fleeting instant, he had the curious impression that they were gazing back, not hungrily, not eagerly, but patiently, as if they had been waiting a very long time. The horses shifted. One of them snorted softly, then lowered its head, suddenly calm. A banner drooped as though tired of standing upright. The army, unstoppable and vast, seemed to grow quiet in its own presence. Genghis Khan dismounted. His boots touched the earth, and the earth felt warm, almost welcoming. The path into the village opened itself without resistance, stones settling neatly underfoot. A door creaked somewhere, not opening, not closing, just stretching. Above them all, the stars watched without blinking, and the village breathed, slowly, deeply, as if preparing for a dream. Chapter 2. The houses that leaned closer. The village did not react to the arrival of the army. No doors opened in greeting. No windows slammed shut in fear. Nothing hurried, nothing flinched. The lanterns continued to glow with their steady, amber patience, and the smoke kept curling downward as if gravity had grown tired of its usual duties. Genghis Khan walked first, his steps unhurried, his shadow stretching and folding itself along the ground. Behind him, his generals followed, then the soldiers, then the long, quiet line of horses. Metal did not clink. Leather did not creak. The army moved as though it had been taught how to walk inside a dream. The houses leaned a little closer as they passed. It was subtle, so subtle that no one could have sworn it happened. A wall that had been straight now curved a fraction inward. A roof that had sagged before now dipped just a breath more, like a head nodding off. Wooden beams gave a soft murmur, not a crack, not a groan, but a sound like contentment. The street beneath their feet was narrow and warm. Stones shifted gently, arranging themselves so that no one stumbled. It felt less like walking on a road and more like being carried. A soldier at the back yawned and covered his mouth, embarrassed by the sound. Another rubbed his eyes, blinking slowly, as if the night air were thick with sleep. One horse stopped walking altogether and stood perfectly still, its head lowered, breathing deep and even. No one noticed when it failed to move again. There were no villagers in the street. Yet the village did not feel empty. Genghis Khan sensed presence everywhere, behind walls, beneath floors, inside chimneys and staircases. Not watching eyes, not listening ears, but awareness spread thin and wide, like warmth in a room long after a fire has burned low. A door on the left trembled, not opening, just trembling. The general nearest to it reached out, then hesitated. The wood looked old, but not rotten. Smooth, almost soft. The iron handle glimmered faintly, pulsing once, like a slow heartbeat. "Leave it," Genghis Khan said quietly. His voice sounded different here. Lower, slower, as if the village had asked it to rest. They moved deeper. The houses were closer now, shoulder to shoulder, their upper stories nearly touching above the road. The sky narrowed to a ribbon of stars. Somewhere high above, something shifted, a long, careful adjustment, followed by a sigh that could have been wind, or breath, or both. A soldier laughed softly. It was not a mocking laugh, nor a fearful one. It was the laugh of someone remembering a childhood room, a safe bed, a voice telling them that everything would be all right. "Feels like home," he murmured. The laughter faded into quiet. One by one, packs were loosened, helmets removed, spears lowered, their tips brushing the walls, which yielded slightly at the touch, like skin beneath cloth. No alarm was raised. No command was given. The village was doing the work. Genghis Khan stopped at the center of the village, where a well stood. Its stone rim was smooth and round, worn not by hands but by time itself. He looked down into it. There was no water, only darkness. Deep, calm darkness breathing back at him. Around him the army settled. Some soldiers leaned against walls that curved to meet them. Others sat on steps that had not been there moments before. A few lay down on the street, their breathing already slow and steady. Above them, the houses leaned closer still. Not to watch. Not yet. Just to listen. And the village, satisfied for now, began to hum, a low, wordless sound, like a lullaby remembered by stone. Chapter 3. The Gentle Weight of Sleep. Sleep arrived without asking permission. It did not crash down or steal breath. It settled. It rested its hand on shoulders, on eyelids, on thoughts, and pressed only as much as was needed. The army, which had crossed continents without yielding, now yielded gladly. A soldier sat against a wall and closed his eyes for just a moment. The wall softened, curving slightly to cradle his back. Another loosened his boots, then forgot why he was doing so. A third lay down beneath a window that exhaled warmth like a sigh, and the stone beneath his head shaped itself into something resembling a pillow. The village made no sudden movements. It understood patience. Genghis Khan remained standing. He felt the pull, heavy, kind, insistent, but something in him resisted. Not suspicion, not fear, but habit. He had learned long ago how to remain awake while the world slept. Still, his breathing slowed. His thoughts drifted. The edges of his vision softened, as if the night were gently smudging them. He walked. The sound of his steps was swallowed immediately, absorbed by the ground. As he passed, doors relaxed on their hinges. Windows dimmed, as though lowering their eyelids. The houses were no longer merely leaning. They were listening inward, attentive to something deep within themselves. From somewhere below came a sound like swallowing. Slow, careful, almost polite. Genghis Khan paused. He placed his hand against a wall. The stone was warm. Not sun-warm, not fire-warm, body-warm. It pulsed faintly beneath his palm, once, twice, then stilled, as if aware of being touched. He withdrew his hand. Around him, the army slept more deeply. Chests rose and fell in unison. The horses no longer shifted. They stood like statues, their eyes closed, breath slow and fogless in the mild night. A banner slipped from its pole and folded itself neatly on the ground, as though tucking itself in. The village seemed pleased. The hum grew richer, layered now with softer sounds. A stretching creak here, a settling groan there. Roof tiles slid imperceptibly closer together. Windows narrowed. Doors sealed themselves with a final, gentle click. Nothing was trapped. Not yet. Genghis Khan felt it then, not danger, but intention. The houses were not hungry. They were preparing, like malice savoring the last quiet before a meal. He looked up. The ribbon of sky above had thinned further, buildings edging closer, their upper floors bowing inward with slow devotion. The stars blinked, then vanished one by one, as if being carefully turned off. A soldier stirred nearby, frowning in his sleep. The wall beside him curved another inch inward, hugging him closer. His frown eased. His breathing deepened. The village adjusted itself around the army with infinite care, cradling, holding, learning their shapes. And far below the ground, beneath stone and root and forgotten foundations, something vast shifted its weight, not waking yet, not fully, but smiling in its sleep, knowing there was time. Plenty of time. Genghis Khan stood alone among thousands of dreaming bodies, feeling the village inhale. Slowly, deeply, as the night rocked the army closer to the moment when sleep would no longer be gentle. Chapter 4. When the walls learned hunger. The change did not announce itself. It slipped in quietly, the way mold creeps along bread, the way a dream turns bad without waking the dreamer. The village's hum deepened, losing its softness, gaining a thickness that pressed against the ears. It was still slow, still rhythmic, but no longer kind. A wall shuddered. Just once. A soldier sleeping against its side turned his head, and did not wake when the stone beneath his cheek puckered slightly, as if tasting him. The surface roughened, pores opening where there had been none, drawing in the warmth of his skin with delicate greed. Elsewhere, a doorway stretched, wood elongated like sinew, fibers separating not into splinters, but into strands, damp and pale. The doorframe bent inward, closing the gap by a finger's width. Inside the house, something wet slid across the floor. Genghis Khan felt it then. Not fear, recognition. The village was no longer preparing. It had begun. A horse's leg sank into the ground as though the earth had softened just for it. The animal stirred, confused, and the stones beneath it puckered and rose, folding gently around the hoof. The horse exhaled sharply once, then fell silent as the street drew it down, inch by careful inch, like a mouth learning patience. No screams yet. The houses were considerate. A roof above flexed, tiles shifting like teeth finding better alignment. From a window came a slow, steaky sound, the sound of something peeling itself free. The window bulged outward, then inward, glass turning cloudy, milky, as if filling with breath. A soldier opened his eyes. He did not scream. His face was pressed halfway into the wall, his mouth distorted as the stone softened and flowed around his jaw. His eyes darted wildly for a moment before the wall tightened, sealing over his face with a quiet, swallowing sound. The village exhaled. Genghis Khan stepped back. Around him, the army began to vanish, not all at once, not violently, but carefully dismantled. A man sank into a doorstep that rose to meet him like a tongue. Another was folded into a corner where two walls met, the angle widening just enough to accept his shoulders before closing again. Blood appeared, but sparingly. The village did not like mess. Where it spilled, the stones drank it eagerly, darkening with pleasure, veins of red pulsing briefly before fading into the walls. Bones cracked softly, muffled, as if wrapped in cloth. The lullaby had become chewing. Slow, wet, methodical. Genghis Khan moved through it untouched. Walls recoiled slightly from his presence, not in fear, but in respect, the way one steps aside for something sharp. A doorway twitched as he passed, then stilled, undecided. He looked into a house. Inside, the floor had risen into a bowl, holding 3 soldiers pressed together, their bodies already reshaped, limbs bent at impossible angles to fit. The walls leaned in, pulsing, contracting, digesting. The ceiling dripped something clear and viscous that steamed faintly when it touched skin. One soldier was still alive. His eyes met Genghis Khan's. They were already half gone. The walls closed. Outside, the street narrowed further, buildings pressing together until armor scraped stone, then sank into it. The sounds of the army faded, breath swallowed, metal muffled, lives erased without ceremony. Above, the sky was gone. Only roofs remained, touching, sealing the village shut like a mouth closing over its food. Genghis Khan stood in the center as the village fed. And for the first time, the houses moved quickly, hungrily, confident now that sleep had done its work. Chapter 5. The village begins to chew. Now the village abandoned all pretense of gentleness. What had once been slow became deliberate. What had been careful became efficient. The houses no longer waited for bodies to rest against them. They reached. Walls bulged outward in obscene anticipation, then snapped inward again, folding men into themselves with a sound like damp cloth being wrung. A scream finally broke free. It did not travel far. A soldier woke fully, eyes wide, mouth open in terror as the street beneath him split like soft flesh. The stones peeled back in thick layers, revealing a glistening interior that pulsed with heat. He clawed at the edges, nails scraping uselessly, before the ground closed around his waist, his chest, his throat. The last thing visible was his tongue, stretched and darkening, before the street sealed itself smooth again. The village swallowed. Doors were no longer doors. They sagged open like lips, frames stretching wide enough to accept armor, flesh, and bone together. Inside, corridors constricted violently, ribs of wood and stone flexing inward, crushing bodies until they fit the space provided for them. The houses learned quickly how much pressure was needed. Too little, and the food screamed. Too much, and it spoiled. The windows had grown blind. Glass clouded completely, turning opaque and thick, then softened and sagged inward. Shapes pressed against them from the inside, not hands, not faces, but lumps and bulges that slid downward as digestion began. Genghis Khan moved faster now. Not running. Running was for prey. He stepped through the chaos with measured calm, his boots splashing through fluids that should not have been there. The village parted reluctantly around him. A wall leaned too close, brushing his shoulder, and recoiled instantly, its surface blistering where it touched him, as if burned. The village understood. This one was not food. Above him, roofs peeled back like lips curling into grins. Tiles fell inward, clattering onto trapped bodies below, driving them deeper into the living architecture. Beams bent, cracked, and reknit themselves, bones becoming part of the structure. Screens turned wet, then stopped altogether. A horse finally woke fully. It reared, shrieked, and a stable that had not existed moments before unfolded itself around it. Wooden slats slid like ribs, piercing flesh without breaking skin at first, pinning the animal in place as the walls thickened and tightened. Its eyes burst with a soft pop before the building shuddered in satisfaction. The village was no longer quiet. It was loud with internal sounds, grinding, compressing, pulsing. The hum had dropped into a bass throb that vibrated through the ground, through bone, through memory. It was the sound of something ancient feeding after a long fast. Genghis Khan reached the well again. The darkness inside it was gone. It was filled now, not with water, but with a slow, rising mass of softened remains, churning gently, releasing heat and steam. Faces surfaced briefly, unrecognizable, before dissolving back into the thick slurry below. The well burked. Stone lips puckered around its rim, sealing it shut with a moist kiss. Around the square, nothing human remained intact. Armor protruded from walls like swallowed teeth. A hand emerged briefly from a floorboard, fingers twitching weakly, before the wood flowed over it, smoothing itself clean. The village was almost done. Only then did it grow bold. A house leaned toward Genghis Khan, farther than any had dared before. Its door yawned open impossibly wide, interior stretching into a dark, ribbed tunnel that contracted rhythmically, inviting, promising. The stones beneath his feet softened, trying to hold him. He did not struggle. He simply stepped forward, and the ground shrieked. A sound like stone being flayed rang out as the street split away from him, retreating in pain. The house recoiled violently, its doorway slamming shut, wood blistering and cracking as if whipped. The village shuddered. It had made a mistake, and it knew it. The feeding slowed. The chewing became uncertain. For the first time since the army arrived, the village hesitated, full, slick with what it had consumed, and suddenly aware that one shape within it did not belong to the meal. Genghis Khan stood alone amid the ruins of men, the village swollen and grotesquely satisfied around him. And deep within its foundations, something massive tightened, not in hunger, but in unease. Chapter 6. The Aftertaste of Men. The village was full. That was the problem. Its walls bulged obscenely, stretched thin by what they held inside. Roofs sagged under the weight of half-digested armor and bone. Chimneys oozed a dark, syrupy fluid that dripped slowly down the sides of houses, hissing softly where it touched the ground. The street twitched. Once. Then again, as if the village were trying to settle its stomach. From within the buildings came noises that no structure should make: wet sliding, slow popping, the dull crack of joints being reduced to paste. Somewhere, deep inside a house, a final breath escaped, long and rattling, before being absorbed by the walls. Silence followed. A thick, obscene silence. Genghis Khan stood in it, the only thing not taken, not changed, not incorporated. The village's awareness focused on him now, no longer spread thin. Every wall leaned inward just enough to watch. Every beam strained. Every stone listened. The well in the square began to move. Its sealed mouth trembled, then split open again with a sound like tearing cartilage. From within rose a stench so dense it seemed visible, the smell of iron, bile, rot, and something older, something mineral and wrong. The contents inside churned faster, bubbles bursting at the surface, releasing scraps of skin, teeth, a half-melted eye that stared blindly upward before sinking again. The village retched. A house on the far side of the square convulsed violently, its door bursting outward. What spilled from it was not a body, but what remained after bodies had been pressed, drained, and forgotten. A slurry of flesh and fabric slopped onto the street, steaming faintly, before the ground drank it back down greedily. The village did not enjoy this part. It had eaten too much. It had eaten too fast. And now there was something inside it that would not settle. Genghis Khan felt the ground tighten around his boots again, more desperate this time. The stones rose like fingers, digging into leather, trying to pull him down into the digestive maze below. Walls lurched toward him, not gently now, but with panic, their surfaces splitting open to reveal fibrous layers beneath, slick and twitching. One wall touched him. It screamed. A sound high and sharp, like granite being snapped in half, echoed through the village. The stone blistered instantly, bubbling and cracking as if infected. The wall recoiled violently, tearing itself free from the buildings beside it. Where it had touched Genghis Khan, it blackened and crumbled, leaking a thin, smoking ichor. The village convulsed. Roofs collapsed inward. Windows burst, releasing thick vapors that stank of digestion and death. Houses leaned too far, crashing into one another, fusing together in grotesque knots of wood, stone, and embedded remains. From beneath the ground came a new sound. Not chewing, not swallowing, breathing, deep, massive. The earth in the square split open with a wet, tearing noise. Foundations cracked apart, revealing layers beneath, not soil, not rock, but something dense and pulsing, layered like muscle. Veins ran through it, thick and slow, pumping dark fluid that throbbed in time with the village's ragged breaths. This was the heart, or something like one. The village had not been many houses. It had been one body pretending. And now it was choking. The ground heaved, lifting Genghis Khan off his feet for the first time. He landed hard, the impact sending cracks racing outward. The pulsing beneath the ground quickened, erratic, panicked. A sound rose from everywhere at once, a wet, gurgling wail, full of pain and confusion. The village was afraid, not of death, of indigestion, of what remained standing in its center, untouched by teeth or stone, watching calmly as the thing beneath him struggled to survive what it had eaten. And for the first time, the village tried not to eat him, but to expel him violently. Chapter 7. The sound a village makes when it is dying. The expulsion began badly. The village did not know how to let go. It had swallowed armies before, slowly, lovingly, but release was a skill it had never learned. The ground beneath Genghis Khan convulsed, trying to vomit him upward, while the walls lunged inward at the same time, confused, desperate, their instincts tangled. Stone tore itself apart. A fissure split the square from end to end, opening like a ruptured throat. From within surged heat and stench and something else, a pressure that made the air throb, that made bones ache inside the body. The exposed flesh beneath the streets flexed and quivered, layers contracting and relaxing in spasms, slick with blackened fluids. The heart, if that was what it was, began to beat too fast. Thump, 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 thump. Each beat sent a shudder through the houses. Roofs cracked. Walls burst open, disgorging what they had not yet fully dissolved. A half-armored torso slid from a window and burst apart on the stones below, spilling a slurry that crawled briefly before sinking back into the cracks. The village wailed, not with sound alone, but with movement. Buildings twisted, bending at impossible angles, their corners stretching like torn mouths. Doorways gaped and snapped shut uselessly, teeth clacking against nothing. Chimneys collapsed inward, coughing up clouds of spores and ash that stuck to the skin and burned cold. Genghis Khan rose. Around him, the ground recoiled violently, peeling itself away as if repulsed. Wherever he stepped, the pulsing flesh shrank back, retreating into itself, leaving behind cracked, dead stone that smoked faintly. The village understood now. He was poison. A house made one final attempt. It lunged, its entire front wall tearing free, revealing an interior that was no longer interior at all, a long, contracting tunnel lined with ridges that scraped and folded, slick with digestive fluid. From within came a suctioning pull strong enough to drag stones loose from the street. The pull reached him. For the first time, Genghis Khan felt resistance, not fear, but weight. The air thickened, pressing against his chest. The ground tugged at his boots, reluctant, furious. He stepped forward anyway. The tunnel screamed. A sound like a mountain cracking echoed as the structure collapsed inward on itself. The ridges spasmed wildly, folding the wrong way, tearing apart. The house imploded, collapsing into a heap of twitching rubble that dissolved rapidly, leaking dark fluid into the earth. The heart below skipped a beat. Then another. The village staggered. Buildings began to die. Not collapse, die. Walls lost their tension, sloughing off in slabs. Roofs sagged and slid to the ground like dead skin. Windows burst inward, no longer holding pressure, no longer containing anything alive. The pulsing slowed, then stuttered. From beneath the ground came a final, massive contraction, a full-body spasm, and the earth split wide. The heart was exposed. It was enormous, pale and veined, layered with embedded fragments of armor, bone, and weapons, all fused into its surface like swallowed memories. It beat once more, weakly, spraying dark fluid into the air. Genghis Khan looked down at it. The heart quivered. Then it burst. Not explosively, obscenely. It ruptured with a thick, wet sound, collapsing into itself, deflating rapidly as its contents spilled outward and were absorbed by the ground. The pulsing stopped. The breathing ceased. The village fell silent. The houses froze where they stood, twisted and broken, their grotesque life extinguished mid-motion. Fluids pooled, then cooled. The stench lingered, heavy and suffocating. Genghis Khan stood alone among the dead architecture. No soldiers remained. No horses. No sound but the slow settling of stone and the distant crackle of something cooling after being alive. Above him, the sky returned, stars blinking back into existence, indifferent. The village had eaten an army, and died trying to swallow one man too many. But far beneath the ruins, deep in the cooling earth, something small tightened, a last reflex, a memory of hunger. Because villages, like nightmares, are rarely singular things. And this one had learned that some meals fight back. Chapter 8. The houses opened their bellies. The village did not die cleanly. Even as its great pulse faltered, even as the center of it split and bled itself out into the earth, the houses kept moving in small, stubborn ways, like limbs twitching after the head has gone quiet. Hunger does not need a brain. Hunger can live in walls, in beams, in nails, in the dark little spaces between stones. And the village was still hungry. The first house that fed properly did so without drama. A row of sleeping warriors lay along a narrow street, their helmets beside them, their mouths slightly open as if they'd been promised rest. The house beside them sighed, a long, damp exhale, and its front steps uncurled. What had been stone became something that behaved like muscle. The steps softened, rose, and folded over the nearest man's boots like warm dough. He woke with a gasp. He tried to stand. The steps tightened. They did not crush him yet. They held him. They held him the way a hand holds fruit before squeezing, testing ripeness, learning where the skin gives first. The man's scream came out thin, strangled, because the stone had already begun to climb his legs, sealing around his knees, then his thighs, swallowing him with polite, steady pressure. The house's door opened, not outward. It peeled apart down the middle like lips splitting, revealing an inner corridor that glistened in the lantern light. The corridor pulsed, and the air that breathed out of it was warm and wet and thick with the smell of old meals. The swallowed man slid forward. Slowly at first, then faster as the corridor contracted. He clawed at the edges, wood that was no longer wood, but fibrous ridges that flexed under his nails and bled clear fluid. His armor scraped, sparks skipping across slick surfaces, but the house did not care about metal. The house only cared about what lived inside it. His scream ended when the corridor narrowed at the throat of the building and milked him through. The sound it made was soft, intimate, a wet, working sound like hands kneading meat. Elsewhere, the village became bolder. A roof sagged low over a cluster of warriors, then dropped, not like a collapse, but like a jaw closing. Beams bent into curved ribs. Tiles slid into place like teeth. The space beneath became a chamber, warm, tight, alive. Inside that chamber, the men thrashed. The walls answered with peristaltic waves, slow rolls of contraction that pressed bodies together, squeezed air from lungs, squeezed spit from mouths, squeezed blood from noses in small red pearls that the plaster drank immediately. A warrior tried to stab his way out. His sword sank into the wall as if into fat. The wall tightened around the blade and pulled. The sword disappeared, inch by inch, until only the warrior's hands remained on the hilt. Then the wall took those too, folding over his fingers with a gentle firmness that snapped bones like twigs. The house swallowed the weapon the way a snake swallows a rabbit. No hurry. No mercy. Some houses opened their floors. boards split, not into planks, but into flaps. Beneath them lay not cellar and dirt, but a depth lined with thick, wet folds, pale and veined, sliding over each other as if trying to keep themselves lubricated. Warriors tumbled in, boots striking soft tissue that bounced and clung. They attempted to climb back up, but the edges of the opening puckered, gripping their wrists, their forearms, their throats. One man got his head above the floor. His face was red and bulging, eyes watering, veins standing out like ropes. For a moment, he looked around as if he might still find someone to help him. Someone, anyone. Then the floor kissed his jaw. It sealed over his mouth. He could still breathe through his nose for a few seconds. Then the floor sealed that too, smoothing itself as if embarrassed by the struggle. The street was littered with the leftovers the village disliked. Helmets, saddles, bent arrows, and in the gaps between stones, thin streams of dark fluid ran like drool, disappearing into cracks that opened eagerly, as if the village had mouths everywhere. Genghis Khan watched it happen in widening circles around him, as though the village were demonstrating itself. He saw a house take 3 men at once, its windows swelling outward, then popping free, turning into soft sacks that wrapped around heads and shoulders, muffling screams into wet, stupid grunts. The sacks tightened, and the men were pulled into the walls like swallowed thoughts. He saw a stable rearrange itself around horses, stalls narrowing, beams bending like ribs, the air filling with the sour steam of panic. Hooves hammered once, twice, then stopped as the floor rose and swallowed the animals whole, leaving only a trembling, satisfied creak. And he saw the entrails, because the village was not tidy anymore. When a house overfed, it split. A side wall burst open like a torn belly, and something long and pale slid out, slapping wetly onto the street. It was not rope. It was not cloth. It was an intestinal length of living architecture, pulsing with slow contractions, slick with digestive fluid, dragging itself like a wounded worm. In its folds were things: a hand, half dissolved, a strip of scalp with hair still attached, a row of teeth, loose like seeds. The intestinal thing twitched, then pulled itself back inside the ruptured wall, taking its prizes with it. The wall stitched itself shut with a seam of fresh, weeping stone. The village shuddered in pleasure and pain. And beneath it all, under the streets and wells and foundations, the great body of the village made a low, groaning sound, not a lullaby now, but the noise a stomach makes when it is too full and still wants more. Genghis Khan stood alone, untouched by the teeth of wood and the lips of stone. Around him, his army became food, not men, not warriors, not conquerors, just warm shapes being pressed into chambers, being kneaded into walls, being churned into the village's dark, slow innards. And as the last coherent screams dwindled into muffled wetness, the village leaned in, satisfied, only to realize that the one it wanted most was still standing, still awake, still looking. Chapter 9. What the Conqueror Does While the World is Being Eaten. Genghis Khan did not shout. He did not call orders that no one could obey, nor curse a village that had no ears in the way men understand them. In the middle of that obscene feast, stone chewing bone, walls kneading men into paste, he did something far stranger. He breathed, slowly, deliberately, as if this were a night camp like any other, as if the sounds around him were merely wind and felt tense and horses shifting in their sleep. His chest rose and fell with a steadiness that did not belong in a place where architecture had intestines and streets swallowed men whole. He walked. Each step was measured. Each footfall landed on stone that twitched, then went still, as though afraid to react too strongly. Wherever his shadow passed, the village's movements stuttered. A wall that had been mid-contraction froze, its fleshy folds quivering, then slackened. A floor that had been pulling a screaming man downward loosened just enough for the scream to stretch longer before being cut off elsewhere. Genghis Khan watched everything. He watched a house choke as it tried to swallow too many at once, its inner corridors clogging with bodies pressed together, armor denting armor, faces flattened into unrecognizable masks. He watched the house convulse, split at the seams, and reabsorb the spill with irritated gulps. He watched a warrior drag ceiling first into a roof that had turned soft and adhesive, his spine bowing grotesquely as the tiles closed over him like lips sealing a kiss that never ends. And he remembered, not this village, but others. Cities that had burned, walls that had fallen, men who had begged, screamed, been crushed, been erased. This was not new to him. Only the method was different. He stopped beside a house that was still working. Its doorway was stretched wide, its interior pulsing, a long column of meat and wood contracting rhythmically. Inside it, several warriors were still alive, their outlines visible as bulges moving slowly inward, their struggles reduced to tremors that traveled along the walls like indigestion. Genghis Khan placed his palm against the stone. The house shuddered violently. Inside, the contraction spasmed out of rhythm. The walls clenched too hard, too fast. Bones cracked sharply, one after another, like a fist closing on dry branches. A gush of dark fluid leaked from the seams, and the house sagged, overworked, its structure warping under the sudden, uneven pressure. The village groaned. Genghis Khan removed his hand. He was not helping the men inside. He was studying the enemy. He knelt. He pressed his ear to the ground, ignoring the slick warmth beneath his cheek. From below came the layered sounds of the village's insides, the slow churn of digestion, the wet slide of absorbed bodies being moved deeper, the strained, labored rhythm of the great mass beneath the foundations trying to process too much life too quickly. The village was vast, but it was clumsy. It did not understand restraint. It ate as if this were the last meal it would ever have. Genghis Khan rose. Around him, the last organized resistance vanished. The remaining warriors were no longer fighting buildings. They were being sorted, pressed into corners, fed into chambers sized just for them, reduced to materials. The village was turning an army into itself. He reached the edge of the square again, where the well gurgled softly, its rim slick and swollen. He looked into it. The surface below rippled. Something looked back. Not a face. An awareness. Old. Bloated with memory. Satisfied and sick all at once. Genghis Khan straightened. He adjusted his cloak, wiping a smear of dark fluid from his fingers without haste. His expression did not change. Not anger. Not horror. Something closer to appraisal. Around him, the village's movement slowed. It had nearly finished. And now, with its belly full of men and horses and iron, it waited, not patiently, not calmly, but with the nervous stillness of something that is overeaten and suddenly realizes there is one last thing on the plate, one thing still standing, one thing watching. And Genghis Khan, alone in the center of the living ruin, did not raise a weapon. He simply stood very still, letting the village decide how it wished to die. Chapter 10. Inside the Belly of Stone. The village decided. It gathered itself for one final effort, not with elegance, not with strategy, but with the desperate unity of a body trying to rid itself of a poison lodged too deep to vomit. Every house leaned inward at once. Streets puckered. The ground tightened, then loosened, then tightened again, like a throat working around the bone. The earth split beneath Genghis Khan. Not a crack, an opening. He dropped. The fall was short but wrong. He did not fall through air. He fell through warmth, through a squeezing passage that contracted as he descended, its walls slick and ridged, gripping at his boots, his calves, his thighs, as if memorizing him. The smell was overwhelming. Iron, wrought, damp stone, old blood ground down into something sweet and nauseating. He landed on flesh. Not soft flesh. Dense flesh. Layered, fibrous, alive. Around him stretched the village's true interior, a vast chamber hidden beneath streets and houses, its ceiling throbbing with slow contractions, its walls veined and glistening, embedded with shapes that had once been men. Helmets protruded like swallowed teeth. Rib cages were half visible, pressed flat against the living stone, rising and falling faintly as the last air was squeezed from them. This was where the village finished its meals. Above him, the opening sealed shut with a wet clap, plunging the chamber into a dim, reddish gloom. The light came from the walls themselves, a sickly glow pulsing in time with the village's laboring heart. The sounds were unbearable. Chewing echoed everywhere. Wet grinding. Slow compressions followed by the dull collapse of structures inside structures. Occasionally, something popped, a joint giving way, a skull failing, followed by a satisfied shudder that traveled through the entire mass. Genghis Khan stood. The floor rippled beneath him, responding instantly, drawing upward around his boots. Tendrils rose, not fast, not violent, but confident, wrapping his ankles, his calves, beginning the long, patient climb that had claimed thousands above. He did not pull away. He let them touch him. The tendrils stiffened. They convulsed, spasming as if burned from the inside. Where they touched his skin, they blackened, split, and collapsed into foul-smelling sludge that the floor recoiled from, retreating rapidly. The chamber reacted. The walls tightened violently. Contractions sped up, becoming frantic. The embedded bodies were crushed harder, faster, their last shapes erased as the village tried to focus all its strength inward. A face surfaced beside him. A warrior's face, stretched and distorted, half fused into the wall. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The wall flexed and sealed it shut again, pulling his skull deeper into the living stone until only a smooth bulge remained. The village was panicking. It had brought its poison into its stomach. Now it tried to digest him. The ceiling lowered. Massive folds descended, dripping thick fluid that burned cold where it splashed. The space compressed, walls and floor pressing inward together, aiming to crush, to pulp, to render him into something manageable. Bones embedded in the wall snapped like kindling. The heart beat faster. Too fast. The chamber began to shake. Genghis Khan walked forward. Each step sent a tremor through the belly of the village. Each footfall left a scorched imprint in the living floor, tissue shriveling and dying around it. He moved toward the center, where the pulsing was strongest, where the contractions originated. The heart revealed itself. It was not a single organ, but a knot, layers of muscle, stone, and absorbed bodies wrapped together, squeezing and releasing in grotesque rhythm. Veins as thick as tree trunks pumped dark slurry through it. Faces surfaced briefly in its folds, screaming without sound before being reabsorbed. The heart sensed him. It recoiled. It tried to pull away, tightening its grip on itself, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber shuddered as the village attempted to turn inside out, to flee its own stomach. Genghis Khan stopped inches from the heart. The heat was immense. The smell was unbearable. The walls pressed in close now, desperate, crushing what remained of the army into the heart itself, as if offering one last sacrifice in exchange for survival. The heart thrashed. Veins burst. Dark fluid sprayed across the chamber, coating walls, raining down in thick sheets. The embedded bodies dissolved rapidly, their final shapes lost in the churn. The village screamed, not from mouths, from everywhere. A sound of tearing foundations, of cities remembering they were once hills, a stone regretting ever having learned to be alive. And in the middle of that collapsing, convulsing belly, Genghis Khan raised his hand, not to strike, not to command, but simply to touch. His fingers pressed into the heart. The pulsing stopped. For one impossible moment, the entire village froze, mid-chew, mid-contraction, mid-scream. Then the heart began to rot from the inside out. Fast, violently. Its surface blackened, split, collapsed inward, releasing a stench so profound it seemed to erase the air itself. Veins ruptured. The chamber filled with dead weight as the living stone lost all tension, sloughing off in heavy slabs. The village died choking. Above, houses collapsed inward, their bellies spilling uselessly into the streets. Floors fell in. Walls peeled away. What had eaten men now sagged into heaps of inert ruin. And from the depths, through collapsing tunnels and dying flesh, Genghis Khan climbed upward, coated in the village's last fluids, untouched by its teeth, emerging alone into the night. Behind him, the sounds faded. The chewing stopped. The hunger ended. Only the memory remained, buried beneath cooling stone and countless digested bones, of the night a village ate an army, and discovered too late that some conquerors do not belong to the world of the edible. Chapter 11. What crawls out when a village dies wrong? The village did not finish dying when its heart failed. That was the final cruelty. Death did not arrive like sleep. It arrived like spoilage. As Genghis Khan climbed upward through collapsing passages, the village's body began to come apart in ways that were neither clean nor complete. The living stone did not simply harden back into rock, it sloughed. Layers peeled away from themselves, thick sheets of tissue separating from walls with wet, tearing sounds, dropping into the depths below where they burst apart like overripe fruit. The tunnels behind him collapsed slowly, deliberately, as if reluctant to let go of the warmth they had held. Fingers of half-alive masonry reached after his ankles, snapping uselessly in the air, their tips dissolving into black mush as soon as they left the main body. Above him, something crawled. Not a survivor. A remainder. From the ceiling ahead, a mass detached itself and fell with a wet slap, blocking his path. It was once a house's interior, a knot of corridors, beams, and digestive folds fused together. It twitched weakly, contracting out of habit, trying to swallow air that no longer fed it. Embedded in it were faces. Not whole faces. Masks of skin stretched thin over bone, mouths permanently open, eyes melted shut, their expressions locked halfway between terror and relief. When the mass spasmed, the faces moved with it, pulled into grimaces they could no longer feel. The thing tried to eat him. A fold opened, slow and tired, oozing fluid thick with dissolved flesh. The opening contracted, pulling at nothing, then convulsed as if confused. The edges blackened where his shadow fell across them. The mask collapsed in on itself. It ruptured with a dull plop, spilling its contents across the tunnel floor. Fragments of men reduced to paste, armor softened and bent like wax, hair clumped together in greasy mats. The smell was unbearable now. A sweet, rotting stench layered with iron and bile and damp stone that had forgotten it was ever solid. Genghis Khan stepped through it. His boots sank ankle deep. When he pulled them free, strings of viscous matter clung and stretched, reluctant to part. The floor beneath began to bubble, releasing pockets of gas that burst with wet coughs, spraying the walls with foul residue. The village was liquefying. Above ground, houses were collapsing not outward, but inward. Roofs folded into rooms that no longer existed. Streets sagged and split, revealing glimpses of the inner layers, pulsing slowed now, irregular, like a dying animal's breath. From one split wall, something spilled out and did not stop. It was long, segmented, a length of the village's intestine, torn free and still working out of reflex. It dragged itself across the street, leaving a slick trail, its surface contracting rhythmically, squeezing out the last remains trapped inside. A hand slid out. Not attached. Just the hand. The intestine twitched, then pulled the hand back in, as if embarrassed to have dropped it. The movement stopped. The intestine deflated. It collapsed into itself, becoming nothing more than a pile of dead, foul-smelling matter that steamed in the cool night air. Silence tried to return. The village did not allow it. From beneath the ruins came sounds, not of life, not of hunger, but of fermentation. The deep, slow bubbling of matter breaking down, releasing heat and gas. The earth rose and fell in places, bloated, as if the land itself were distending with what it had been forced to absorb. Genghis Khan emerged fully into the open. The square was gone. Where it had been was a crater of collapsed structures and exposed layers, like a cross-section of a body left out in the open. Bones jutted from walls. Armor protruded from the ground at odd angles, fused into stone. Here and there, a final twitch passed through a remnant, a beam contracting once, a floor pulsing weakly, before going still forever. The village smelled like a butcher's pit left too long in the sun. Nothing moved toward him now. Nothing dared. Behind him, deep underground, the last reflex fired. A final, meaningless contraction that squeezed the remaining slurry into the soil, staining it dark for generations to come. Genghis Khan stood alone amid the remains of a place that had tried to eat history. He did not look back as he walked away, because behind him, the village was not resting. It was rotting. And rot, unlike hunger, has no memory, only consequence. Chapter 12. The cold that comes after the feast. The cold arrived last. Not the clean cold of night air, but the intimate cold that rises from within dead things, when heat has fled and left behind only dampness and decay. It crept out of the village like breath from a corpse's mouth, low and crawling, coating stone and soil with a clammy sheen. Genghis Khan felt it against his skin. For the first time. Not fear, but temperature. Behind him, the village continued its slow undoing. Where walls had once pulsed, they now sagged and leaked. Thick fluids seeped from cracks and pooled in hollows, congealing as they cooled. The smell changed again, less sharp now, more suffocating, sweet and sour at once, the smell of something that had eaten far beyond its limits and would never digest any of it. A sound came from the ruins. Not loud, not sudden. A scraping. Genghis Khan stopped. From a collapsed house near the edge of the crater, a shape was pushing itself free. It was not a man. It was not a building. It was what remained when the village had tried to combine the two and failed. It dragged itself forward on elbows that had once been walls. Its body was a mass of fused torsos, pressed together so tightly that skin had split and rejoined in new, incorrect ways. Faces were scattered across it without order, some sideways, some upside down, some half absorbed, their mouths opening and closing uselessly as if still chewing air. Its movement was slow, painful. Each pull left streaks of dark residue behind, strings of half-coagulated matter stretching and snapping with soft sounds, like tearing cloth soaked in water. The thing was alive. Not fully, but enough. It made a noise. A sound like many throats trying to inhale through one mouth. A bubbling, rattling gasp that carried the last fragments of voices within it. Not words, not screams, just the raw reflex to breathe. It was trying to crawl back, toward the village, toward the place that had made it. The ground beneath it responded weakly, twitching, as if recognizing a piece of itself. Stone softened for a moment, trying to accept the mass back into the body that no longer functioned. The thing shuddered in relief, sinking slightly. Then the ground stiffened again, rejecting it. The thing convulsed. Several mouths opened wide at once. Something spilled out. Not organs. Those were gone, but thick cords of connective matter studded with teeth, bits of bone embedded like gravel. The cords thrashed briefly, searching for purchase, then went still, collapsing back against the mass. The thing began to whimper. Not one voice. Many. All out of time with one another. Genghis Khan turned. He looked at it. The thing froze. Its many eyes, some intact, some milky, some reduced to wet hollows, fixed on him. Recognition passed through it like a wave. The whimpering rose into something sharper, more urgent, a pleading noise squeezed out of ruined throats. It tried to crawl faster. The effort tore it apart. A section of its body split open with a wet crack, spilling a heap of softened remains onto the ground. Within the heap, a helmet was still visible, lodged in what might once have been a rib cage. The helmet rolled free and came to rest upside down, slowly filling with dark fluid. The thing collapsed. It did not die. It simply stopped moving. Its mouth continued to open and close for a long while, soundlessly, until even that reflex faded. Silence returned again, thicker now, colder. The village settled. The ground sank in places as the last internal spaces collapsed, burying the worst of what remained. Steam rose briefly, then thinned, leaving behind a landscape scarred and glossy, like flesh that has cooled too quickly. Genghis Khan resumed walking. Behind him, the ruins made one last sound, a deep internal shift, like a stomach settling after sickness. Then nothing. No hunger. No movement. Only the quiet certainty that the ground would never be clean here again. That grass would grow thin. That animals would avoid it. That men, centuries later, would feel unease without knowing why. A chill along the spine. A sense of being watched by something that once had malice everywhere. Genghis Khan walked on into the dark, carrying the cold with him for a while before even it dared to fall behind. And far beneath the ruined village, where digestion had failed and rot had won, the earth closed slowly over the memory. Sealing in the night a place tried to eat a conqueror and learned what it meant to choke. Chapter 13. The things that do not stay buried. The ground did not close properly. It tried. It sank, folded, pressed down with the dull patience of earth reclaiming a wound. But the village had been too much. Too full. Too wrong. What remained beneath was not shaped for burial. It was shaped for containment, and containment had failed. As Genghis Khan walked away, the soil behind him shuddered once more. A bubble rose. It broke. From the cracked earth seeped a thick, gray-black foam, warm despite the night air. It spread slowly, hissing faintly, carrying the stench of spoiled meat and damp stone. Where it touched rubble, the stone softened, slumping inward as if remembering how to be flesh. Something moved beneath the foam. A shape pushed up, then sank back down, then pushed again, uncertain, unfinished. Fingers emerged first. Too many of them. Some human, some not. Some fused together into paddles of bone and cartilage. They clawed at the surface without finding purchase, scraping weakly, as if the ground itself were resisting being touched again. A face followed. It was not a survivor. It was an echo. The face had no eyes, just smooth depressions where they should have been. The mouth was stretched far too wide, lips split and rejoined, teeth set at irregular angles like a collapsed wall rebuilt badly. When the mouth opened, the sound that came out was not a voice, but a draft, air being pulled through cavities that had once been lungs. The thing did not rise fully. It hung halfway out of the earth, fused at the waist, its lower half still entangled in the village's remains. The foam around it thickened, pulsing faintly, as if the ground were still trying to digest what it had been forced to swallow. More shapes followed, not whole beings, fragments with intention. A ribcage dragged itself free, vertebrae clicking together, as if attempting to remember posture. Inside it, nothing remained but a slurry that sloshed when it moved. A cluster of heads rolled together, still connected by stretched cords of tissue, jaws snapping reflexively at nothing. They were not alive. They were reacting. The village had taught them that. Genghis Khan did not turn back. He felt the movement behind him anyway, a pressure, a wrongness that pressed against his spine like cold breath. The foam hissed louder, and from it rose a chorus of wet, useless sounds, sucking, gurgling, the faint click of teeth meeting where no food remained. The things tried to follow. They failed. Their movements tore them apart faster than they could progress. Limbs detached, heads split. Structures collapsed into heaps that steamed briefly before going still. The earth, embarrassed now, hardened rapidly, sealing over them in jagged plates. Still, something remained. From the center of the ruined village, a final structure stood upright, not a house, not rubble, but a pillar of fused material, rising slowly as the ground expelled it. It was layered with floors, walls, bones, and armor compressed into a single vertical mass. It leaned. It watched. At its peak, a window frame remained intact. Inside it, the interior was no longer a room, but a throat that opened and closed slowly, tasting the air. With each movement, a low sound escaped, not hunger anymore, but longing. The pillar groaned. Cracks raced down its length. It collapsed. When it hit the ground, it burst apart, releasing a wave of foul heat and the last of the village's breath. The foam evaporated. The sound stopped. What remained was inert, cooling, finally, dead. Genghis Khan reached the edge of the valley. He paused there, just long enough for the wind to catch up to him. It carried the smell for a while, then lost it, unwilling to remember. The stars above were sharp again, distant and cold, as if nothing below had ever learned to chew. Behind him, the ground lay still. Too still. Because deep beneath the sealed ruin, in pockets where the earth had folded badly, small movements continued. Not hunger, not life, but the slow rearranging of matter that has learned the shape of men and cannot forget it. The village would never rise again, but it would never be clean. And sometimes, on nights when the ground warms too much, the soil would swell just a little, as if remembering mouths. Chapter 14. The night learns to remember. The valley did not return to darkness. it should have. The stars were sharp, the moon clean and distant, the wind cautious again. Yet the light clung to the ruins in a sickly way, as if the ground itself were faintly luminous from within, a residual glow left behind by digestion, by heat, by lives pressed too deeply into stone. Genghis Khan felt it at his back. Not pursuit, memory. The earth behind him remembered weight. It remembered thousands of bodies pressed together, remembered the rhythm of chewing, the pleasure of compression. Even now, long after movement had ceased, the soil occasionally tightened, then relaxed, as if working phantom meals through muscles it no longer possessed. A sound drifted across the valley. Soft, repetitive. A wet clicking, irregular, like teeth knocking together without a jaw to guide them. From the edge of the ruin, something shifted. A house frame, only half a house now, leaned upright against nothing. Its walls were gone, its roof collapsed inward, but its doorway remained intact. Inside the doorway was not darkness. It was depth. The opening stretched longer than it should have, receding into layers that folded and unfolded slowly. The edges of the frame pulsed, faintly moist, tasting the air. From within came a dragging sound, like something being pulled forward by contractions that no longer had purpose. A shape emerged. It was tall, too tall, made of stacked rooms and compressed bodies fused together vertically. Floors had become ribs. Staircases curved outward like exposed spines. From between the layers, arms protruded at wrong angles, bent backward, flattened into architectural elements. Some still twitched. Its head was a roof. Broken tiles hung like teeth. Beneath them, a face had been pressed flat and spread wide, its features smeared across the surface. The mouth opened and closed uselessly, grinding stone against stone, producing the clicking sound. The thing swayed. Each movement caused pieces of it to slide downward internally, accompanied by wet thumps, as whatever held them in place finally failed. Dark fluid leaked from seams, dripping onto the ground, where it hissed faintly before soaking in. It took a step. The ground buckled under its weight, not from mass alone, but from recognition. The soil softened briefly, trying to accept it back, to finish what the village had started. The thing moaned. A low, vibrating sound passed through its structure, the echo of many trapped throats trying to exhale through one shape. The sound carried across the valley, and the ruins answered with faint tremors, sympathetic spasms in dead stone. Genghis Khan stopped again. He did not turn. Behind him, the thing tried to follow. It failed. Its next step caused its middle to collapse inward. The stacked rooms compressed suddenly, too fast, too uneven. The structure folded, snapping in half with a thick, crushing sound. The upper portion slid off and struck the ground, bursting open. What spilled out was not organs. It was contents. A slurry of men reduced beyond recognition, mixed with splintered beams, shattered bones, softened armor. Faces surfaced briefly, then sank again, their features dissolving as the mass spread. The lower half convulsed. It dragged itself forward another inch, leaving a trail of viscous matter behind. Its roof mouth opened wide and released a sound that finally resembled a scream, not loud, not sharp, but stretched thin, like a memory of terror pulled too far. Then it collapsed completely. The pieces settled. Steam rose. The ground hardened. Silence returned, heavier now, weighted with finality. Genghis Khan walked on. Behind him, nothing else rose. Nothing else tried. But far below, deeper than collapse, deeper than rot, the earth shifted minutely, not with hunger, not with life, but with storage. The land folded the remains into itself carefully, like a body hiding evidence inside scars. The valley learned how to hold at night. Centuries would pass. Grass would grow. Men would build roads nearby and never quite understand why their animals refused to step closer. Children would wake from dreams of walls pressing inward, of houses breathing too close. And on certain nights, when the ground warmed and the air grew still, the earth would make that soft clicking sound again. Not teeth, but stone remembering how it once chewed. Chapter 15. The Lullaby Beneath the Soil. By the time dawn approached, the valley had learned how to be quiet again. Not innocent quiet, not empty quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something has been torn open, filled beyond reason, and then forced to close around what it cannot forgive. Genghis Khan reached the far ridge as the first pale light touched the horizon. He did not look back. He did not need to. The ground behind him had settled into its new shape, and that shape would never change. Valleys remember better than men. Below, the village lay flattened into itself. No longer houses, no longer streets, but a single, uneven scar. The soil there was darker, heavier, breathing just a little slower than the land around it. When the morning wind passed over it, it did not lift dust. It carried a smell that birds avoided and insects misunderstood. Nothing rose. Nothing crawled. Nothing begged. But deep beneath the surface, where roots would one day grow crooked and thin, the remains continued their final work. Pressure rearranged what could not be digested. Fluid seeped into pockets and cooled. Bones clicked softly as they settled, aligning themselves not as skeletons, but as structure. The earth built with them. In the deepest layers, where no light would ever reach, the last reflex lingered, a slow, useless contraction, repeating itself long after purpose had fled. It squeezed nothing. It held nothing. It was simply what remained when hunger outlives the body that owned it. Sometimes trapped air escaped. It rose through the soil in thin, trembling paths and surfaced as a sound so faint it barely existed, a soft, rhythmic thump, pause, thump, like a heart remembering its job. Genghis Khan disappeared into the morning. History would remember his victories, his cruelty, his reach across the world, but not this. This place would not be written down. Maps would curve around it. Stories would fray when they came too close. Yet the valley would tell its own story. It would tell it to the groundhogs that refused to dig there, to the wolves that skirted its edge without understanding why, to the children, centuries later, who would dream of houses with warm walls and rooms that grew smaller while they slept. And on those nights, when the dream grew too tight and the walls leaned too close, the earth beneath their beds would hum, low, wet, patient. A lullaby, not to soothe, but to remind that once, long ago, a village learned how to open its belly and eat an army whole, and that even after it died choking, it never quite forgot how good the warmth felt inside. Epilogue: the measure of what cannot be eaten. Long after the valley learned to keep its silence, long after the soil cooled and the scars disguised themselves as hills, the world continued as it always does, forgetting what did not survive to insist on being remembered. Empires rose. Empires fell. Men spoke the name Genghis Khan with awe, with fear, with legend on their tongues. They spoke of cities burned, of walls broken, of numbers so vast they became abstraction. They spoke as if conquest were a hunger without consequence. But the earth remembered otherwise, because there, in that nameless valley, conquest meant something older than ambition, a hunger without mind, without mercy, without victory. Stone that learned to chew. Houses that learned the warmth of men. A place that mistook an army for food and discovered too late that some forces do not submit to digestion. The village lost, not because it was weak, but because it tried to own what only passes through history unchanged. Genghis Khan walked on, untouched, unconsumed, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a constant. He did not defeat the village with steel or flame. He survived it by being what he had always been, something the world bends around, never fully containing, never fully understanding. Behind him, the land closed its mouth. It learned restraint. It learned shame. And it learned that even hunger has limits. To this day, nothing grows quite right there. Stones lie too close together. The ground holds warmth too long after sunset. And sometimes, when the night is very still, the earth hums, not with life, not with desire, but with the echo of a lesson carved too deep to erode. That some appetites end in rot. That some victories choke the victor. and that some men walk through the bellies of nightmares and leave them dying behind. The valley sleeps now, but it does not dream. It remembers. And the world, unknowingly, walks on top of that memory, grateful that the ground learned, just once, what it means to be full.